The prelude to our story begins with the police breaking into a church. They remove bricks from the wall to uncover objects. Meanwhile, a man is there talking on the phone. He talks about someone named Rosetta, who is in intensive care. He also talks about how the rest of the people simply vanished. Then the scene changes to present one of our protagonists, Gray. He stands before an assortment of equipment. He then uses some of them to start installing cameras in the house. Later, another man named Deacon arrives at the house. They get acquainted with each other and we find out that Gray is a tech specialist. He also mentions he could not live there due to the place not having internet or cable. The man likens the house to the Middle Ages. We also learn these two individuals will be sharing a room, something Deacon does not like. Outside, Gray speaks with someone on the phone, talking about a generous bonus. Speaking of generosity, Deacon brings him a cup of tea. Back inside, Gray gives him a headcam that they have to wear. We still don't know what they're doing there or who is employing them, but it seems like they have an important job to do. Deacon insists he's not wearing the headcam while on the toilet. At night, we see the cameras don't capture anything interesting. In the morning, the tech specialist comes to Deacon in the kitchen. He asks him where his headcam is, so he goes and grabs it. Afterward, Gray admits he is looking forward to seeing very strange things. However, Deacon warns him not to get his hopes up. At a different time, they hear a bell ringing in the distance. Later, that night, one camera captures a shadow behind the kitchen window. It seems like whoever or whatever it is leaves rather quickly. In the morning, Gray says they need to wait for someone called a relator general, but Deacon is eager to go somewhere. He starts moving Gray's equipment, causing the man to yell for him to calm down. The next scene shows the duo driving to the place Deacon wants to go. As they do, Gray asks him if he has ever known any Buddhists. Turns out, Gray had a girlfriend who was a Buddhist. He says she did a vow of silence, which he thinks is brilliant. Perhaps the man just didn't want to hear her speak. Soon Gray gets lost, so Deacon asks an elder man if he can direct them to the church. Oddly, all he does is stare at Deacon. Then the duo arrives at a fence, where Gray finds some film tape. He wonders who would leave them there. Deacon informs him that Satanists do, since they record messages on them. Messages like spells or curses. They climb over the fence, bringing all of their equipment, which is a lot. After that, we see the inside of a church. A priest is there, giving a sermon about some monk 700 years ago who didn't believe in Jesus. Outside the church, Gray asks a local if he gives names to his cows, remembering how his old schoolmate did the same. He then starts narrating a long-winded story about this schoolmate and his cow. Following the weird story, a priest comes out whom Deacon addresses as Father Krellick. We learn the priest is expecting the duo. Deacon informs him that the relator general has been delayed. After exchanging a few more words, Krellick says he will show them where a certain phenomenon took place. Later, we see Krellick baptizing a baby. As he does, a bell rings and interrupts him. Items start falling for some reason. All the priest can do is hold his arms high to acknowledge God. Turns out, this is a video that Gray is watching and it glitches in the end. Gray thinks it is crazy what he watched. Krellick tells them this has been his project for a few years, adding how they opened the church 2 months ago. He gives Deacon the church records he asked for, prior to asking if installing cameras is necessary. Deacon insists that they have to investigate thoroughly. After they install the cameras in the church, they head to a bar. Gray can't stop being amazed by the video he watched, showcasing the paranormal activity, saying he must have watched it 50 times. The man wonders what will happen if they find something spooky. Deacon says they will report it and other personnel will decide what happens next. It's likely these two are tasked to observe and report on the situation. Deacon expresses his amazement at the lack of strings on the items that moved in the video. We learn that unlike Gray, Deacon thinks what they witnessed on that video is fake. Wanting to challenge his skepticism, Gray brings up the topic of a girl in Spain who had stigmata a year ago, insisting such a case can't be faked. He points out that Deacon was there to investigate it. Still, he thinks the incident in question is fake too, and not a good one. He explains that every day, for 10 weeks straight, the girl's mother and feet open. Because of this, the poor girl suffered blood poisoning. Then, after the girl lost her life, her mom told Deacon that he could now turn her daughter into a saint. When they return home, the third member is finally there, asking Deacon if he is still one of them. This man is Mark, a priest. Deacon is similar to him in a way, although he is seemingly no longer affiliated with any religious organization. Mark explains he was late because he was doing a fundraiser in Boston. Mark is a strict man, reminding his teammates about certain regulations pertaining to their operation, one that the duo breached. Deacon tells him it was his idea to go to the church, not Gray's. This does not surprise Mark. When Deacon sets the church documents down for Mark to look at, the priest moves them back in Deacon's direction. As the trio eats, Deacon hears something outside. Mark tells him he's imagining things. However, they all suddenly hear the disturbing sound of an animal squealing. Then, there is a fire seen through the window. Deacon rushes out and uses a fire extinguisher to put it out. Turns out someone set it on fire, and this deeply disturbs Gary. Following this, we see how the cameras in the church show no activity. Soon, the door opens and Krellick walks inside with a lantern. He kneels and starts praying. Within that prayer, the priest asks God that he show himself again. He continues to pray until he hears something like a child screaming far away. The scene cuts off as Krellick starts going outside. Back at the house, Gray meets Deacon in the kitchen. He is reading a journal from Dr. Pritchard Manville. who was the last minister of the church they went to. The church closed around 1880. The man wrote that God visited him in dreams, calling him to this area to open an orphanage nearby. Taking the journal, Gray reads that the minister considered the locals a solemn bunch. The tech specialist knows how he feels. It seems that he actually believes in something after all, just not as much as his two companions. On the next day, the group is outside the church. After Mark meets Krellick, he tells the priest of this church that he can go elsewhere for a day or two. The trio will perform a thorough investigation, which will require that they have full access to the church. So Krellick gives him the keys. While walking inside the church, Mark tells his friends it was built in around 1260. He picks up a crucifix and sees nothing under it that might cause it to fall, like in the video. Gray wonders how his teammates can doubt Krellick. He says the priest can't move items from a distance. They watch the spooky video again and Deacon catches something. There is water vibrating on the altar. Deacon believes a speaker under an altar is capable of doing that. In Mark's opinion, these people think they are doing the church a favor by faking miracles, but what they're truly doing is dragging everyone back to the Dark Ages. Then, the crew starts searching the church for anything suspicious. Gray uses a device that can detect magnetic fields. It can allow him to locate hidden speakers inside the walls. Later, Mark asks the duo if they are responsible for producing sounds that are like paint being scraped off, and they say they are not. Soon, Deacon hears a sound coming from a bench. Gray surprises him by popping out from under one while making goofy sounds. Deacon simply looks at him, thinking Gray is an idiot. Afterward, Gray talks to someone on the phone again. He talks about how Deacon likes to drink alcohol despite having been a priest. Gray also talks about Krellick, who he says is a few rosaries short of a crucifix, whatever that means. As the man talks, he loses the signal on his phone. Subsequently, he hears something strange. He walks for a while, only to encounter an aggressive dog. Hearing Gray scream, Deacon comes to his aid. He sees Gray lying on the ground, explaining there was a dog that now ran off. Deacon responds with an insult. After that, Mark looks into a very dark fireplace. His head cam glitches and he lets out a startled cry. His companions come to him, seeing the priest lying on the floor. Strangely, he has blood in his ear. Back at home, Mark thinks he must have ruptured his eardrum on the flight, so Gray suggests he should see a doctor. He says this not out of concern, but because he doesn't want to be accountable if something bad happens to the man. After Mark goes to bed, Deacon asks Gray how he ended up working for the congregation. He reveals it was through a website and he was also asked if he was a believer, to which he said he did. Deacon is curious if he lied. Gray admits that despite not growing up religious, he still believes in something divine. Then, Gray asks Deacon what happened in Belém. So Deacon begins telling a story. According to him, there was a shrine there that has a peculiar reputation. The Cardinal Prefect Rinaldi led the investigation. There was a queue of sick people inside the shrine who were waiting to be healed. Yet what they got was something better. Apparently they saw God. Eventually, Rinaldi started giving confusing reports. When he vanished with his team, the Vatican went crazy. They were found in a jungle a few days later. The autopsy revealed atypical chemical traces that Deacon guesses were DMT, a strong hallucinogenic substance from plants. He thinks the priests had a bad reaction to it that made the locals panic and dump the team. Or maybe they truly did see God. After telling this story, Deacon demonstrates a magic trick using Gray's bottle, an act that Gray finds hard to fathom. Meanwhile at the church, Krellick is praying like he did previously. We hear a child crying in the distance. Also, the doors near the benches start creaking open. In another room, something falls to the floor. Perhaps the biggest paranormal occurrence is when the bell starts dinging out of nowhere. Krellick can only hold his arms in acknowledgement to God as he did in the video. On the following day, Deacon continues reading from Pritchard's journal. One passage from it says that someone lies beneath, hungry for souls. In the final passage, Pritchard says that he sees the logic of the orphanage. He may have a new master now. Deacon speculates that it's not an accident that Pritchard's journal ended up in the church because Krellick may have put it there. He thinks the priest wanted them to read it to understand something Krellick can't bring himself to talk about. The next scene shows Deacon back at the church with Gray. Mark is sleeping at the house. Krellick is there to tell the duo he heard the voices last night. He asks them if they think he's a fool. Gray tells him they want this to be a miracle just as much as Krellick does. However, the priest does not believe them, even for a second. Before walking away, he insists that he's not like Pritchard. Then, Gray starts talking about a spectacular device he brought, one that will allow them to find whatever it is that exists in the church. They set up several microphones in different places. Soon, the device picks up a sound coming from the fireplace. Gray believes it sounds like something is moving inside the wall. He then uses his other device on that wall to check for hidden speakers, but the wall is clear of them. Later, Mark joins the team and hears the same sound. They also hear the sound of a crying child, the same one Krellick heard earlier. Not being an easy man to fool, Mark thinks it could be interference from a nearby baby monitor. This assumption is rather solid, but then the crucifix on the altar suddenly moves until it falls, putting doubts in their heads once more. At that moment, Deacon spots someone looking inside from the window, so he goes out to check. The man reports to his teammates that it was Krellick. His presence makes Mark question the credibility of what they witnessed. Wanting to see what the priest is up to, he goes to another part of the church and enters a dark room. Suddenly, the main door slams shut. Back to the other two, they hear the crying child again. Deacon thinks Mark's hypothesis about it being a baby monitor might be correct. Interestingly, this is when Gray informs him that he switched his powerful device off. This means what they're hearing can no longer be a baby monitor. Then, Mark climbs onto the rooftop, where he sees Krellick standing with his back toward Mark. The priest of this church calls Mark out for not believing in his miracle. The other two, however, now believe that the miracle claim is hard to deny. Out of nowhere, the crucifix on the wall falls. The figure of Christ ends up shattering. This might be indeed paranormal, but at this point, it's hardly the work of a Christian god. To make the situation worse, Krellick. This prompts Mark to yell out to his companion. When they rush out, they find Krellick just lying there. At a different time, Deacon comes to Gray to tell him the police are with Mark. Gray doesn't understand why Krellick did what he did. He states that it's a sin to termination. Deacon agrees, adding how the souls of those who commit such sin descend into hell. Later, while taking a walk, the duo walks past a few hooligans goofing around. One of them sounds like he's imitating a sheep's voice, triggering Deacon's memory of. The man can't contain his anger, so he punches the guy. Gray scolds him for his unnecessary reaction. In the next scene, the duo is at a bar. Deacon believes Krellick was under a lot of pressure, believing it to be the reason he jumped. Soon, their conversation develops into the things people worship. Gray points out how primitive people worship what is physically there, things like the sun or the trees. However, Deacon is more inclined to believe in speculative entities. Gray points out that if he had to choose between believing a tangible being compared to a theoretical one, the choice is clear. Deep into the conversation, they realize they aren't wanted at the bar by the locals. The people are upset about what happened to Krellick. Deacon stands up to a certain man, telling him they came there to help. Upon arriving home, Mark informs them the investigation is over. This is something Deacon cannot accept. He firmly believes it isn't over. However, Mark demands to know how can such an awful event be classified as a miracle. He adds that nothing is going on in that church except a depressed priest who is no longer of this world. Still, Deacon insists they should go back to see if anything else happened. And if nothing does, they will know for sure if it's time for the investigation to conclude. All Mark does in response is yell that a priest has lost his life. Later, Deacon decides to venture to the church by himself. While walking, he hears someone who he thinks could be Krellick. When he finds a cloth on the ground, Deacon unravels it to reveal a pile of worms. Needless to say, this discovery disgusts him. Once he's inside the church, he hears frightening whispers. He also hears the crying child once more. Desperate to understand what's going on, Deacon hurriedly removes books from a shelf before removing the shelf itself. He finds a hidden door with a strange symbol on it. There is nothing else to do, so he opens it. The revealed passage is a spiraling stairway, like the one that might lead to a catacomb. Deacon calls out to whoever may be down there, and he hears someone yell the words, Frazetti's eyes, along with other ghastly sounds. The man can't bear to stay in that area, let alone descend the stairway, so he rushes out of there. The bell starts ringing and he runs back to the house, where he tries to regain his composure. He then calls someone on the phone, possibly someone from the Vatican. In the morning, the group drives somewhere. We see Deacon telling Mark that the situation is not resolved. As expected, there is a disagreement between them regarding what to do about what Deacon experienced last night. Mark wants his fellow priest to know that this will likely be Deacon's last mission with the congregation. The group then arrives at their destination. A plane lands, in which an important man resides. He is Father Calvino, a man outranking all of them. Deacon informs Gray that Calvino is an expert in the history of the church. When the man enters their car, he joyfully greets Deacon. At the house, Calvino watches the footage of what Deacon's head cam recorded in the stairway. Regarding the name Frazetti, the skeptical Mark thinks Deacon could have uttered it himself. Deacon fires back with the rhetorical question of how he could talk in Krellick's accent. Calvino informs the group who Frazetti is. According to him, Frazetti once worked under Deacon. Mark adds that Deacon was in Belém and all those priests were still alive in the time he got there. All he had to do was bring them home. But he couldn't resist meddling. The people pulling the scam thought they were discovered, and that led them to murder the priests. They would have ended Deacon too had he not been drunk that night. Gray is curious to know what the words Frazetti's eyes mean. Calvino then reveals Frazetti was unable to deal with what he saw. Therefore, he removed. Outside, Gray talks on the phone again. He is upset that everyone is withholding information from him. Now, he doesn't care about the bonus he will receive. It seems like this mission has truly affected him in an unsettling way. Back inside, Calvino talks about Pope Gregory, explaining how in a letter to Mellitus, he wrote that the temples of heathen gods must not be destroyed. Instead, what should be destroyed are the idols within those temples. Hearing this makes Gray ask if the church used to be a pagan temple. It wasn't the building, Calvino says. It was the ground. What is present there is even older than Christianity. Once the church came along, they drove whatever it was away. They called it the Antichrist. Unfortunately, it has returned. While the four of them are in the car, Gray tells Deacon the foundation of friendship is trust. He is upset with Deacon lying to him about the priests in Belém. Deacon defends himself, stating there were reasons he didn't tell Gray the truth. Later, Deacon admits to Gray that he made a mistake. Because he ignored a warning, 7 priests had to lose their lives. He knows he will have to live with that for the rest of his life. Inside the church, they see the mess Deacon created with the books. They also see a symbol on the floor. According to Calvino, it represents the deity that was worshipped by the people who were there. Fortunately, the symbol is all they require for the banishment ceremony. Shortly after, Calvino chants something in Latin. Mark thinks it's ridiculous because it's not a Christian ceremony. This is when Deacon admits that for the first time, he has seen things he can't explain. However, Mark remains an unbeliever in what he considers to be medieval superstitions. Then, all four of them stand together, repeating words in Latin. Suddenly, the lights explode. There is a lot of interference with all the headcams, so our experience of what takes place is heavily distorted. Eventually, the cameras return to a functional state and we see Mark lying unconscious. Deacon searches for Calvino, who seems to have disappeared. Gray tries to leave, but the door closes on him. It won't open, prompting him to search for Deacon. He traverses the spiraling stairway until he runs into the man. All this chaos is making Gray lose his mind. Deacon has to calm him down so they can escape. The priest wants to find Calvino. As they walk through the cave, they hear someone screaming. Soon, Deacon finds Calvino's crucifix necklace on the ground. Despite all of this, he tries assuring Gray there is no evil there. It's hard to tell if he even believes what he says at this point. Afterward, they enter a place that has a message on the wall. It states someone is pleading to God that certain people be saved, and that whoever wrote it had found a new master. Deacon recognizes these to be Pritchard's words. Deacon hears someone talking from a distance and he thinks it's Mark. He then walks through an area where the walls keep getting narrower. Past it, Deacon finds drawings on a wall that look satanic. There is a figure that seems like a demon sacrificing. Furthermore, the room itself contains skulls that belong to. This situation proves to be far too terrifying for the duo. Deacon then remembers Pritchard's orphanage. Hearing someone again, he sees Mark's face in the distance and the chase continues. Alas, Gray gets stuck in a narrow tunnel and forces Deacon to come back for him. Once he helps him out, they resume going after Mark. Before long, they start crawling through another narrow area. It becomes too narrow such that Deacon says they have to go back. Attempting to do that, Gray finds out the passage is blocked from his end. What's worse is that the area they thought was a tunnel starts moving. No matter how hard they try, they cannot escape. Then slime begins to cover the trapped duo. Aside from the substance being disgusting, it also burns them like an acid. At this point, it seems like they are stuck in a giant organism's digestive tract. Gray fearfully yells to Deacon that he told him evil wasn't real. They scream in agony while being slowly burned by the digestive juices. The last thing we hear is Deacon giving his final prayer before the darkness consumes everything. We are left wondering whether Mark became possessed after the disturbance made him unconscious, or if he was always aligned with the evil force, just acting like nothing was going on. The film ends with many questions left unanswered.